Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. So welcome, friends, to this Sunday Dhamma talk. And again, this is, we had last week, I think, several things falling on one day. Yesterday and today was the 4th of July holiday here in the USA, and it was also today the full moon. So the topic of today's talk is going to be continuing from where I left off last week on the discussion of the Paticca Samuppada. And but I also want to integrate that with some reflections on the meaning of independence, especially from the Dhamma point of view. Now, last week we were discussing the lifetime to lifetime process of the Paticca Samuppada and the process of rebirth as it connects one lifetime to another lifetime in the process of samsara. And this week I'm going to talk about the moment-to-moment rebirth process. It's the same process, but happening on a macrocosmic scale, which is the lifetime to lifetime or external rebirth, and the moment-to-moment rebirth is on a microscopic scale. That means on a sort of an atomic level that you can only see within the mind. And how does that tie in with Independence Day? So here in the US, yesterday was, the day that they celebrate the United States independence from jolly old England. And so, the colonists wanted to get free of whatever oppression of paying taxes or other types of oppression they felt that the British were exerting on them. So, like they had the famous Boston Tea Party and, other types of things, and then the Revolutionary War. So then they got independence, right? So that's one kind of independence, is when you are under the rule or authority of others. And so the people feel like they're trapped, right? So countries all over the world, India and Sri Lanka, and so many countries got their independence after the World War II from the British and other places. And so that's one kind of independence. But on a personal level, on a Dhamma level, we're also dependent. And we're not independent. And we're not free. So we're dependent on a lot of things. For one thing, when you're born, you're dependent on your parents, right? So, the child grows up, the parents put them on a curfew, or they tell them they shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that. And, so there's that tension of feeling the parents are trying to keep you down. And then you have, let's say, if you join other groups or a church, or the government is trying to hold you down, limit your freedom. So that's another type of wanting to be free. And then like the hippie movement, right, in the early 60s. So the young people in Europe and America, wanted to be free from being forced into the so-called American dream, right? And to conformity, right? To conform. So they rebelled that. And so boys wanted to grow their hair out long and, all those things. So, they wanted to become free from that. But in the process of wanting to become free, they become dependent on other things, such as drugs, or they become dependent on others in different ways. So ultimately, no one is absolutely free. And then even if you are kind of free to do what you want physically, one is still trapped within one's own mind. One is not really free, because the karma that we've been accumulating in this lifetime, or even from previous lifetimes, all that is basically trapping us also in repetitive type of habits of speaking, using our body, and thinking. And also dominated by the ego. And so most everyone is trapped in that, especially in certain types of bad habits, and then they accumulate karma that causes them suffering. So this is sort of the approach or idea that I wanted to reflect on, or that aspect of, becoming mentally independent. So even the Buddha in some suttas, he says there's a sutta called dwelling with a mate. And he means that if there's greed in your mind, that means you're dwelling with somebody else. Your mind is wanting this and that. So it's not really dwelling free. You're dwelling in your past thoughts. You're dwelling and clinging to the future. And, that is not the totally free state either. Or people think, oh, I'm a free thinker. No one's a free thinker. There's no such thing as an original free thought, really, at the very deepest level. Because actually there's no self, ultimately. So anyway, we're going to try to understand some of that. I know this is a very kind of a deep subject, and it's not easy to even to explain. But it's the moment-to-moment rebirth of the mind that is especially important for us to understand as meditators, as practitioners of the Dhamma. As we mentioned before, a lot of people say, oh, do we have to believe in rebirth in order to be a Buddhist or in order to meditate? And usually most people would say, well, it may not be, you may not have to really believe in rebirth to be a Buddhist or to meditate, especially to meditate, especially the lifetime to lifetime rebirth, as I explained last week. But if you don't understand the moment-to-moment rebirth of the mental process and the rebirth of consciousness moment-to-moment, then you probably will not be able to escape the traps that it brings. Being trapped by our own delusions, by our pride, our vanity, and so many other types of habits. So that's what probably the most important part of this discussion would be, trying to, understand that, because it's one of the most deepest and difficult aspects of the Dhamma to understand. You know, the Dhamma teachings, the three cornerstone kind of topics of the Buddhist teaching are about anicca, dukkha, and anatta, or impermanence, suffering, and no self. Now, impermanence and suffering are probably not that difficult to understand, at least on intellectual level or some reflective level. But it's the concept of self that is, harder for most people to understand, and it can only really be directly understood through the meditation. So, the ignorance. So, if you remember, most of you, I think, were here last week. And so in the dependent origination, the 12 links of the dependent origination, the usual starting point is ignorance. And we saw last week that there's no first point in time when ignorance started. Like, one day, billions of years ago, somebody threw down ignorance on the world and there was ignorance. But, so there's no first point in time like that. Or when living beings started being manifesting and undergoing the process of samsara. So anyway, there's ignorance. So last week we talked about ignorance and the mental formations from a last life produce the consciousness at death, produce a consciousness that relinks to the new life. And then that consciousness, along with the ignorance and mental formations that came from the past, govern or dominate largely the development of that new baby. And it's not like predetermination necessarily, although there is a lot of that there, but it's not kind of sealed fate necessarily. But it's the conditionings that cause people to be different. And as we know, every living being is a unique person. There's almost 7 billion people on the planet now, and every single one of them are going to be different in one way or another. Even identical twins, even though they're identical in many aspects, there's still some differences. And those differences would be determined by the karma. Because if you have the same exact parents, you're born at the same exact time, you get brought up in the same exact way, but yet those two identical twins can take totally different directions. Because I know at least one set of identical twins that was some of my best friends when I was younger, and their lives even though they looked pretty much similar, their lives went different ways. Anyway, so and then they accumulate karma through that life. And then when they die, the new accumulated karma and ignorance. So this life had come with ignorance in the accumulated karmic formations from the past life. But we're continually re-strengthening them and repeating them and strengthening them during this life. And their content is always changing. It may increase or decrease depending on how a person leads their life. But then when we die again at the end of that life, we're taking that sum total of ignorance and the mental formations again to another life. So anyway, coming back to the moment-to-moment process. So that the whole 12 links of dependent origination are occurring every moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking during this life. From the moment the baby was born until the moment the baby dies, that is the paticca samuppada that is occurring every mind moment. So you could say that if you took a roulette wheel, or a wheel spin, you got 12 points on the wheel, and you spin it and it goes back up, that's one revolution of ignorance, depending on ignorance, volitional formations, all the way up to suffering and death. And that's occurring every moment. Now, some of those moments are fairly easy to understand. Some of them are more difficult. But this is what I would try to explain, because it's important for understanding the mind and how the mind gets caught in its delusions and how it gets caught in its habits and keeps repeating them. And the importance of where meditation is able to break the cycle. And so transformation only happens when that cycle can be kind of interrupted. So try to kind of follow along with me as best you can. So, let's say in your own life now, okay, when we were born, we got the accumulated ignorance and the karmic formations from the past life. And then that relinking consciousness came to our mother's womb. And that same consciousness then starts working in the life of even in that one cell organism, in the mental formations, will go to some extent determining the sex of that baby, or other aspects of what that baby might have, some deformations, or it might have some other difficulties, or it might die in the womb even. It might abort spontaneously, or various things. So these kind of abnormalities, to some extent, are due to the karma formations brought from past life. Now, of course, a lot of people don't want to believe that and so on, but that's another issue. So then when the baby starts in the womb for 9 months, then depending on the consciousness, the mind and body. So for 9 months, the new mind and body of the baby is developing in the mother's womb. We're taking the example of a human baby, okay? And it's the karma formations in the consciousness that's helping that, as I just explained, to develop the baby. Maybe it's only whatever. Of course, it could be interfere if the mother was taking drugs, this and that. That might also interfere and cause some problems with the baby too, as we all know. And anyway, then the baby's born. Now, even in the womb, the baby has contact. And so in the womb, the mind and body is being developed. The 6 senses are being developed, but the senses are limited just to the feeling of the baby, what he's feeling inside the womb, maybe warm fluid, and maybe they say the baby can hear sounds, right? So anyway, but that's a limited. But when the baby's born, then you got contact, because now the 6 senses, the 6th sense sphere is complete. You got sound, smells, taste, touches, and so on, bombarding it the whole time. So, and there's nothing you can do about that up to that point. So there's contact. And then as the baby grows older, he starts contacting more and more things, right? Parents start giving him things, and then these feelings, based on the contact, the feeling arises. The pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings. And I've already told the story about how the baby develops pleasurable and painful feelings. And when the baby's born, it doesn't have ego consciousness yet. That consciousness that was relinked into the womb, it doesn't necessarily have ego consciousness, because it needs that the contact of the world. And so it's kind of dormant. It's in a dormant stage. And it usually takes about 6 months for the the ego consciousness to develop in a new child. That's why in the first 6 months, the child's eyes are just kind of wide open and it's always smiling most of the time. And it's just like, just stuff moving through the mind, but the baby doesn't really know what anything is. It's just a lot of colors, sounds, smells, and sensations, and it's all a big game for the baby at that point. Well, maybe not totally a game, but, but then as it grows older, it starts then choosing and getting attached to various things. And then its likes and dislikes from the past life will start manifesting. In other words, the karma formations from the previous life, once it starts having contact with the world around him, then the memories of those objects from past life will awaken in that sankhara kanda. And that's why the baby will then have affinity toward certain persons, like might recognize some person that he knew in a past life, or some place, or some smell that's familiar, maybe smell of pizza or something, or beer. These memories get activated, and then they are naturally attracted to them. So that's because of the karma formations influencing this new consciousness. Now, it depends on the environment the baby's brought up. If they were brought up in a family that does a lot of weird things or is addicted to this and that and drinking, smoke, then if the baby had done those things in a past life, they would then get more influenced by that. But if it wasn't, then the baby might not have interest in those things and might not follow the parents' example. There are people like that, many. So that's partly due to the karma. And this is where the differences in like kids start to develop. Now, this process is going on, this moment-to-moment process. Every time the baby hears something, sees something, smells, tastes, touches, you got the ignorance and the karma formations that he was born with are influencing how he's going to be reacting now, and what kind of attachments and aversions or greed and hatred, how strong it might become as it grows older. And then, because of the feelings that are being produced, the craving arises. That means the desire to get something, the desire to push away. And then the grasping. And that means the holding on to that object. We can see that quite clearly in a baby, right? You might show a baby something, and he might just instinctually kind of reach out. But then when you try to take it away from him, what happens? His fist tightening or hold on to that. That's the grasping. So we can see that very clearly. The initial kind of smile he gets from seeing something, but when he gets a hold of it, then he's holding on to it. You didn't have to learn that from anybody, right? And then they do some action on it, which is the becoming. So the craving, grasping, and becoming, this process is called the karma process. And it's happening every moment of this paticca samuppada. Every moment of hearing, you got ignorance, karma formations, consciousness, contact. And the mind and body is already there. The six senses are already there. Those are givens, right? So when the baby starts, becoming active, the things that he can't change are ignorance from the past. Immediately change. The ignorance from the past, the karma formations, the mind and body, the consciousness, the mind and body, and the six senses, and the contacts. And the feelings that arise, they can't be changed immediately. But after the feeling, that's when craving arises. And even the baby won't be able to change anything about craving because he's not able to. And even the baby can't really do much at all. Only when the person gets older and they start learning Dhamma, then they start, questioning these things. And anyway, but that process of craving, grasping, and becoming, it's not all that obvious. In some ways, it's very obvious. In other ways, it's very subtle. But let's take an example, like if you have let's say a fly is buzzing around. So, you're just sitting minding your own business, and maybe you're in meditation and you're, getting some good concentration, and all of a sudden bzzz. Okay, up to that point, you had ignorance, volitional formations, consciousness, the mind and body, the six senses, and the contact, and those are givens. Those are always there. But it's the contacts then that can be varied, because depending on where you are, you're going to hear different things, smell, taste, look at, think different things. So the contacts start coming up, and that's what's producing the feeling in that moment of sound. I mean, the mind goes in a memory and remembers that from 1 or 2 lifetimes ago, and says that's a bee. Or maybe even as a baby, you heard that sound. And then the fear, because the memory of what a bee does. Maybe you got stung. So that immediately arises. Or if you're trying to meditate and you hear a sound of a fly, you would be mindful and say, hearing. And but at the same time, you would probably notice an unpleasant feeling arising. And immediately the desire to probably try to pull away from it, not liking it, would arise. And then you have to decide, are you going to just let it land on you and crawl up your nostril or into your ear or into that, inside corner of your eye? Those are great, actually, for observing the sensations. And all these sensations are like fireworks going off in your nervous system. And, and then you're grasping, you're identifying, that's a dirty fly, I want to get rid of it. That's grasping the object. The initial aversion is the craving, but because you identify it and you start thinking flies are dirty, and if I let it crawl in my eye, I might get a disease. All that is happening quicker than Google processes information. All these connections and ways of thinking arise in a nanosecond to cause our reaction, which is the becoming. We might quickly, just like that, really quickly. How many people have ever done that? Just like nanosecond, boom, your reaction is right. That whole process happened that quickly. That whole process of contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and becoming, those 5 things happen that fast. And that is what's happening that fast all the time. But not all things are obvious. So the very light contacts that we have don't cause much reaction. Let's say white noise that you get used to and you don't even think about it anymore, even though there's a sound there, but it's not producing any type of reactions or things that you don't know about. If you don't know what something is, you kind of just ignore it, right? And it's interesting about languages. If you've ever traveled to foreign countries, if you can understand the language, then you're always attracted to want to know what they're saying. But if you don't understand the language at all, you just forget about it. You just let it be noise. You don't even care about trying to listen because you know you're not going to understand anything. But if you understand the language, then you can see that craving, desire to hear, and then judging what they're saying. Maybe they're saying, "Oh, these stupid tourists," and so on. But anyway, so this process is going on, and you create the becoming. Let's say you lift up your hand to scratch. So that's the karma. There was an intention there, but it happened so fast that you didn't hardly even notice it. And then you did that volitional formation. So every time you react to a stimulus, it strengthens that volitional formation, goes back and strengthens number 2, which is the mental formations or the karmic formations in the number 2 spot, to make them stronger. So next time you feel the same kind of sensation in the future, that habit pattern will probably react in the same way, just as Google predicts what you're going to do, right? It's a very good analogy, actually. Computers are great for understanding the mind. And then once you do the karmic formation, then this is the interesting part, then birth. Depending on bhava arises birth. Now, how are we supposed to understand that? This is the very interesting part. Now, the word is, the bhava, we call karma bhava. That means becoming. So it's translated as becoming in some books. I like that one better, becoming. Because the habit becomes stronger, because it locks into a feedback loop in the nervous system. And the neurons are creating new neural pathways of reacting and so on. Unless we interrupt it, and they just keep flowing in the same circular patterns. Every time you hear, taste, smell, feel a similar type of object, it will trigger off those things without any self doing it. It's just more or less a mechanical process in an unmindful person. That's what's important to understand, that we'll get into. So and in the next moment, the ego is born again. I won. I got what I wanted. Or I didn't get it. Poor me. So this, because again, as we mentioned, the sense of I is not a permanent aspect of our consciousness. As we've talked about in other talks, mind moments are similar to a reel of motion picture frame. That each moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking is like a separate frame on a movie reel with a little gap in between. And each of those arises and vanishes, but at a very high rate of billions a second. And so we don't see that. We don't see the arising and vanishing. But the sense of self, because it's there in the ignorance, it arises again with each of those moments of contact. It arises with the idea that I am hearing this, or I am seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, or I am deciding this, or I am liking, disliking that. But then it vanishes. But then it arises immediately again if the object is prolonged. Like if you're intently looking at something with desire, that process happening millions of times in the space of just a few seconds, that whole paticca samuppada is going complete revolution, faster than a propeller on an airplane. That's very interesting too. Because when a propeller is going slowly, you can still see the 5 blades, right? But as it starts going quicker and quicker, the blades disappear. And actually, people who walked into a propeller and got their head cut off because they couldn't see the propeller was going at full speed. They weren't aware of the sound. But anyway, that's another issue. So anyway, so this process of the I, it comes up each time that you do an action. There's the idea that, I was victorious in getting away from what I didn't like or getting what I did like, or any of other number of type of, relationships. So And then because the I is there, that's birth. In this moment-to-moment sequence, because the next time the consciousness arises, that's a birth. That's a new birth. It is not the same consciousness that came. It arose and vanished, but because of the momentum of the past, the new one will arise. But it's a continuity is there. And this is what is difficult to understand. It's probably one of the most deepest aspects of the Dhamma and the Paticca to understand. And it can only be understood in the very, very deepest stages of insight and so on. Okay, the Buddha came on to say, right, okay. Or wrong. What happened there, Prashant?
Click on your picture.
Hmm?
If you click on your picture.
Okay. And then once the ego is born, then it suffers because it's the ego that suffers, the sense of I that suffers, the consequence of that action. And of course, old age and death is a little bit harder to understand in this moment-to-moment thing, but so it takes a little bit of kind of just, acceptance. Or some of these things can't be defined, perfectly because they're so difficult. But the death is when that ego consciousness dissolves. But we don't see the dissolution of the consciousness because our perception is very dull, is slow. It's like the propeller going at a slow speed and we see the individual things. Because, we're hearing, we cling to everything. Oh, what's that sound? What's that sight? Oh, this is. And so we're spending a lot of time lingering on the different sensory impressions. So that slows down our ability to notice the arising and vanishing. So, and because our mind has other hindrances, like it's dull or it's been dulled by drugs or sleepiness or whatever, or it's just got a lot of emotions and so on. So it's dull. So that's like one complete round of the Paticca in that example of, let's say, feeling a fly land on you or hearing a sound or seeing something. So desire may arise for some things, anger, hatred arise for other things. You might react to some things, you might not react to other things. And it all depends on the intensity of the object and one's past conditioning and training in dealing with that. So anyway, so that process of the moment-to-moment Paticca is what is occurring from the moment the baby is conceived to the moment it dies at the end of the next life. That whole process, is occurring. And basically it's a closed loop for a person, for the uninstructed worldling. I love that the Buddhist talk definition where it says the untaught worldling, uninstructed worldling. And it has no regard for Dhamma teachings, no regard for anything higher than eat, drink, and be merry, So don't take that in the wrong way. So that process is a closed loop. And so when the baby dies, or when most people die, they live, through their life, most people's consciousness doesn't grow in spiritual wisdom. Now, some do, of course, but let's say quite a lot of them, they don't. And so there's no much development in terms of liberation or working on slowing this process down, the process of accumulating suffering throughout a person's life. And in some ways, they increase their amount of greed, hatred, and delusion. based on where they were born, brought up, and so many other conditionings. Now, I want to talk about, how this plays an important part in our meditation practice, and where these links have to be kind of interrupted. In other words, there's a closed circuit link going on. All these things are feeding each other as long as unmindful reactions. But then once a person starts questioning things and decides that they've had enough of beating their head against the wall, or being addicted to various things and causing problems in their life and this and that, or receiving the painful consequences of their actions, some people start to wake up and start to question. And that's the beginning of the spiritual path. So where we begin to slow that process down, as I mentioned, is we can't do anything really right away about ignorance, mental formations, consciousness. We already have the body, we have the senses. We can't do anything about contacts. Of course, you can avoid going to certain places to have certain contacts, of course. So you can control it to a certain extent, but not fully, because anything can happen at any time. And also the feelings are going to arise. But the feelings you can change over a long period of time. Because what used to cause you a painful feeling when you were younger might produce a neutral or a pleasant feeling in you now. And I give the example of when I was a young boy with avocados. I hated avocados, and I got a painful feeling every time I heard about them, or smelled or tasted them, and so on. But with the practice of Dhamma, I was able to change that viewpoint and overcome that aversion to avocados and actually begin to like them. And so people can change the way they view objects. And when you were young, you might have liked heavy metal up at 100 decibels, right? And now you may not like that kind of music. So as we mature, what used to bring us a pleasurable feeling may now bring us a painful feeling. What used to bring us a painful feeling might now bring us a pleasant feeling, right? So that shows that even the feelings are not self. They don't have any independent value in themselves. And that's why they can be changed, but it has to be changed through breaking the thoughts and the reactions to these objects. And that's the karma process of the craving, grasping, and becoming. So craving, grasping, and becoming, that's called the karma process. So generally, but mostly, we can't do much about the feelings on a moment-to-moment basis. We can deal with them in the moment, but they're going to arise depending on how you've reacted in the past. And before, you might, when you start meditating, you might have a lot of pain in your legs, and any little pain in the leg will produce a painful feeling, and you'll get worried. But later, as you develop your meditation, you might have the same feeling arise, but your reaction will be different because you've learned to accept it, or you've learned to tolerate it, or you've learned to reflect on it and not to overreact to them. And so what used to be even a painful body feeling could turn into a pleasant feeling. Or if you know how to use them, you can even, even if you're scared to go to the dentist, because you're afraid of these painful feelings. He said, go to the dentist and just, meditate on the feelings. A lot of times I don't take Novocaine. They're drilling, and I just watch the sensation. And I just relax the nervous system. So the sensations kind of just ricochet around, but they're not getting stuck anywhere. And sure, they may not be pleasant, but at least I'm relaxed and I'm not, making a big tizzy about it. And I actually get joy from when I endured that. Yeah, it didn't bother me. You can actually get joy from the pain if you do it with insight. So anyway, these are just things to consider. So coming back to the karma process of, and this is also where the Noble Eightfold Path plays its important role. Now, the Noble Eightfold Path, I've mentioned it before, I may go into it later again, but is broken into 3 groups of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, or skillful conduct, mental calmness or concentration, and wisdom. So these 3 divisions work on weakening these 3 of craving, grasping, and becoming. And that's how we change our karma. This is where you change your karma. And the first one is with sila. Now, sila works on the becoming, because sila is you're sort of forcibly stopping your reaction. So let's say there's an urge to tell a lie. And you see that, but because you're taking the sila, you kind of force yourself, no, I won't do it. Maybe you would have liked to, but at least they say you didn't tell the lie. So then you've weakened that tendency to tell a lie, one small degree. And then that goes back into the mental formations, number 2. And the next time it comes out, hopefully you'll be able to do the same, resist it again. You may not always be successful, but let's say if you get 2 out of 3, then gradually that is over, years and so on. It will reduce. In the same way for the other types of actions that we do, maybe killing insects or other types of behavior, flipping people with a finger, or using 4-letter words, So, but it's because of the mindfulness. I mean, because of the sila, you forcibly stopped yourself. So at least you weaken the becoming, right? But the thoughts about it are still there. You still might have liked to have done it. And so that's the grasping is the thoughts about it. And so the samadhi or concentration is what weakens the grasping. Because when you meditate, when your concentration improves, your thoughts slow down, or you enter a deep state of stillness, the last thing that come into your mind would be break any precept, right? So it's a samadhi that diminishes the power of the grasping. That means the thoughts that would have given rise to the becoming. But it doesn't do much necessarily about craving. So far we said the sila directly works on the becoming to kind of help you to at least avoid the gross, obvious types of external karmic actions through the sila. Because of the fear of the painful results, somehow you're able to do it. But the thoughts will still be there. So you're never free from that. If your mindfulness is weak, you could let slip some bad language or some other types of thing. Oh, gosh, that's not good. So the daily practice of meditation will help to weaken all of that grasping thoughts about objects, and whatever insight that you've developed through meditation, you can use that Dhamma Vijaya, the investigation of Dhamma, to contemplate and to help you let go of some potential reaction. But then there's still craving. But, craving is actually kind of harmless. Some people may say, what? What are you talking about? Craving is the second noble truth. Cause of suffering is craving. Yeah, but where does craving come from? Ignorance and grasping. or the karmic formations come from the becoming and the grasping. So anyway, the craving is just the initial thought. And if you're mindful of it and you don't grasp, it'll vanish immediately from your mind. It's the grasping that holds the thought in your mind. That's why it's called clinging, right? Because the mind is clinging to that desire, that aversion, that thought of me, I'm so great, and builds it up. But the initial thought itself is quite weak, and it can't do anything without grasping. And then the becoming. And the craving is only eliminated by wisdom. And I think I might have mentioned this in a previous talk. It's because if you understand the 4 stages of enlightenment, desire and aversion, greed and hatred, are not even weakened in a stream enterer. So even a stream enterer, right, the first stage of enlightenment, theoretically is not weak in greed and hatred. Only at the second stage, and that's because of the wisdom. It's the wisdom that weakens the fetters. I know it's a little bit hard to understand if you haven't heard the terms before. But so anyway, it's only because then the wisdom, when you attain the second stage, it weakens greed and hatred. But it's because of the wisdom. That's why I say craving can only be eliminated through wisdom. And so this is how the Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Sila works on becoming. Samadhi works on grasping. And the Panya works on weakening the craving until the cycle is broken. And in that process too, of course, the wisdom, the ego is being reduced at each of those levels too. So, that's how that moment-to-moment process is working. And and actually, when the cycle of becoming is broken, there is, let's say, death. Now, the idea of death, we said the birth is the birth of the ego in the moment-to-moment process, that becoming, because of becoming arises birth. That means because of our deliberate intentions, the ego is strengthened to come up again just as strong or stronger than the previous time. So that's birth. And death in the Dhamma language is death of the ego. That means the attainment of arahantship is called ego death. And that's why I said that an arahant does not die. And people never say that, well, a person who knows the Dhamma would not say the Buddha died. The Buddha attained parinibbana. And death doesn't apply to the Buddha because the Buddha's body dropped away, but the Buddha's mind had died already. That means the ego death. He had died to the ego. And the ego is the deepest level of ignorance. That's the ridgepole, is shattered. And so basically the arahant dies before they die. They've died mentally to greed, hatred, and delusion. And so in Dhamma language, spiritual language, that's the real death. So the death of the physical body is nothing much, but the average person makes a big deal out of it. But that's not the real death in the Dhamma language. Because, when an ordinary person dies, their ego conscious, and then the whole process starts again. But that process is uninterrupted and broken by the ignorance. By the cessation of ignorance comes a cessation of volitional formation. So the cessation of ignorance means the arahantship. When the person attains arahantship and the ego is totally eliminated, because the ego is what produces volitional formations, our intentional actions, karmic actions. And therefore, there's no consciousness to be attracted to another life, whether it's lifetime to lifetime life or it's within this life. So the Buddha might have lived 40 years after he was enlightened, and he still had a consciousness, but he didn't have ego consciousness. He had awareness, not an ordinary person's consciousness. And that's what's hard for people to understand. But once you get a glimpse or a taste of that in meditation, even though there may be very momentary little glimpses of some of these things, then you start to get some better idea of that. So that's what's important, that, you know, this is the type of rebirth that one should try to understand. Okay, if you don't believe in rebirth from these physical bodies to physical bodies, don't worry about it. You can still practice meditation quite effectively. And you could say you're even a Buddhist, because so many of the monks in the Buddha's day, they never died, because they met the Buddha when they're 20 years old and attained arahantship in that life, so they didn't even die anyway. They attained parinibbana. So, you know, they might not even have been a Buddhist. But they understood the cycle of the mind. That's what's important, to understand how the mind keeps getting born. Our habits are born over and over again. It means every time you deliberately do a habit, it's born again. It will be born again. And next time a similar stimulation touches it, because it's a feedback loop again of just electromagnetic energy and neurons and so on, just traveling in circuits. And it's the mindfulness that interrupts that. So when you're practicing mindfulness and restraint and bringing along wisdom and right effort, you're able to flip that switch, the switch that causes your hand to go up and slap the fly, you switch it. No energy goes into the arm. And so that loop gets weakened. And if you can sustain that over and over and over and over and over again, gradually it gets atrophies, you know, and a new feedback loop of the wholesome one. That's called neuroplasticity. You know, and even, you know, people are recognizing that that's true, but the Buddha knew about this so many long time ago. But hardly anybody mentions the Buddha and give me any credit for that. But anyway, anyway, that's what I wanted to show you, because, you know, this is what you observe. This is what you study. You know, when you sit down to meditate, you know, after, you know, you deal with the hindrances and you've gotten some kind of momentary concentration or even some jhana without getting stuck in that, you bring it to bear on this process. And to observe that process of, you know, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, becoming, and then gradually pulling back from it, not feeding your energy into it. And that's how the mind gets suspended, and how you enter into a kind of samadhi is a suspension of that, the old habit patterns of thinking and reacting. Or insight will do it too. So either concentration or practicing insight or a combination of both of those are the way that we use to interrupt the old karmic cycle and to create new positive karmic cycles of wisdom and, you know, developing the factors of enlightenment, and the eightfold path as well. Okay, friends, so I think that might be enough for this Dhamma talk. And if there's any questions, if anybody wrote down any chats. Doesn't look like there's too many. There's one here. Let's see what that is. Oh, hello from Gettysburg. Okay. You're not on the chat here, so people won't hear it. Okay, so anybody who gonna out there in virtual world ask a question based on that talk? I got a couple of my friends here that are actually here live in person because we had a weekend retreat, and one of them has a question. So if you want to ask the question. They don't need to see you.
They don't need to see me now. Okay, so Bhante, a question that's about ego. You talk about consciousness, that there's this, I mean, I'm just going to put it, express it the way I understand it now, and hopefully you can clarify. There's like the cosmic ego, a self of existence. I have a sense of self as separate from others. And then there's the developing ego, that we have as a personality. And you talk about it in terms of a baby. It seems in terms of the cycle, the initial consciousness is this fundamental big ego consciousness. And then the child, as you said, about around 6 months develops another sense of ego. So is that a correct understanding of like a certain existence ego versus sort of a personal self-ego?
Well, there's consciousness. It's the idea of cosmic ego, but there's consciousness, right? And that consciousness may or may not have an ego to it if it's not connected with, human beings and so on. Like, consciousness in an ant may not have an ego consciousness. It's just reactive and attracted to things, but may not have a sense of I and me and all that. But, they do have some kind of intelligence. So anyway, it's a difficult thing to really explain perfectly. But, all these larger cosmic questions, the Buddha didn't really encourage people to try to figure out everything. Just the important parts about suffering and the cause of suffering. And that's about our own ego consciousness and how it is developed, from the time of a baby, and how it grows and changes even during our lifetime, and how we can sort of tame it. So, we shouldn't be too concerned with trying to answer all these cosmic questions. Like the Buddha gave he was with a lot of monks out in the forest one evening, and he picked up a few leaves in the forest. And he said, in the fall, when all the leaves had fallen off the trees, he said, what do you think, monks? Which is more, the leaves in my hand, the 4 or 5 leaves in his hand, or the millions that were laying on the ground in the whole forest? The monk said, well, the leaves in your hand are small, minuscule compared to the amount of leaves in the forest. And he said, in the same way, monks, what I have taught you for your welfare, to understand the Dhamma, to liberate your mind, is like the leaves in my hand compared to what I might know about the cosmos and all these other things. But, don't bother with that. Your mind's already cluttered up with just mundane greed, hatred, and delusion. Why do you want to clutter up with so many kind of cosmic philosophical questions that don't have anything to do with your suffering? Really, in terms of here and now suffering. So, people could hear that response or not. Okay. Is there any other question that might have come up? In meditation, it is often easy to identify whether a thought is about the past or the future. But sometimes it seems more complex thought is about both the past and the future. Is there any benefit in trying to dissect the thought into its components? Or is it better to just let it fade away and refocus on the meditation object. Well, probably it's enough to just understand it, if there's some desire or aversion connected with that thought of the past or future. But yes, our thoughts are very complex, and they're, it's not easy to, because they're happening so fast. This process is happening so fast that it's not easy to see all that. So I wouldn't bother trying to figure all that out. It's basically enough to know that these thoughts are the past habits, and they're influencing my present thoughts and actions. It's going to affect the future. But to understand what's arising in the present, does this have greed or hatred or delusion in it? And then do the needful to try to not react or do the becoming in more greed, hatred, and delusion, and to apply one's wisdom. And so, yeah, we simply, we note things. Okay, this greed is there, anger is there. Now, if it keeps coming back over and over again, then there might be a more complex reason that's causing that. So we can then take it as a subject to contemplate. Why is this thought so important to me? Why does this always keep coming back? You can trace it back. Well, okay, this happened then, and then before that, something else happened. And then you might see where it kind of originated from. And if it's clear, fine. Then, okay, you got clarity on that, drop it. Come back to your center or your breathing. But if there's no obvious thing to cause, then, don't spend too much time trying to figure it out. Just know that these are thoughts and things from the past that could have been even lifetimes ago where something happened and we'll never know it. So, there's no point in spending time trying to figure them out. But I know some people want to go to a hypnotherapist and, get hypnotized and remember their past lives to find out what kind of phobia they had. Now, there could be some use in that. If it's some real kind of phobia, there could be some use. I wouldn't necessarily say a person shouldn't do that. But it's just this fascination with people wanting to, I'm not interested in my past life. Because what the life is now has had the influence from the past. And so my life now isn't all that bad, right? So why worry about it? But if the life is really getting worse, you're digging yourself deeper and deeper into a hole, or it hasn't improved, then, it's more important to figure out maybe why in a more detailed way. So, this is another question. Is it true that once becoming takes place, then birth is automatic, and only if becoming doesn't occur, that birth isn't repeated for that action? Yeah, once you've done the action, then you can't really take it away. Let's say, you say a dirty word to some person, that person immediately punches you in the nose. There's nothing you could do about it. It happened so quickly, an immediate effect of the becoming. And so that birth is automatic. The ego saying, oh, so yeah, the ego is strengthened and it comes up in the next moment. But if you work on it through meditation, through developing wisdom, you can gradually weaken it so it doesn't come up so stronger, 10, 20, 100, thousands of meditation hours down the road. You've seen that this ego has been reduced. And so that's how you know the Dhamma is working. Nothing comes quick. Most people who have made progress in meditation have been meditating many years. Actually, the Buddha talked about 4 types of persons according to how they progress in Dhamma. Some people, the progress is slow and painful. Other people, the progress is slow but pleasant. In others, the progress will be fast and painful. And in others, the progress may be fast and pleasant. There's probably very few that have fast and pleasant progress. Most of them are somewhere, in between, or slow and painful probably for quite a lot of people. Okay, so anyway, but you can prevent becoming, but it doesn't mean it's going to immediately stop the birth of the ego again. I'm talking the birth of the ego only happens with arhatship, or it's weakened at the sotapanna stage and then weakened more at each successive stage. But that could take years and years and years. So the best we can hope for is we interrupt the becoming so that the suffering isn't so strong. The ego may still be there until you develop sufficient wisdom, but at least we're talking about reducing the suffering in the beginning. And so the obvious suffering, the hard suffering, getting stabbed in the back because you cheated on somebody's spouse. So at least the ego can be dealt with, as time goes on down the line as you increase your meditation practice. But that's why sila is important. Sila and samadhi. So at least if you can develop sila and samadhi, you'll go, probably 80% in reducing suffering. And the ego will be quite tamed by that time. So the amount of suffering it's producing is fairly minimal, I would say, in that kind of sequence. According to the Abhidhamma, contact, feeling, perception, volition, one-pointedness, psychic life, attention are universals and happen with every consciousness. Does this mean that we do not have control over these factors? No, you do have, you can control your perceptions and you control your volitions. So the volitions are controlled with the becoming and with the practice of sila and with other aspects of teaching. Again, but they're not going to be just overcome overnight. But of course, the better meditation you have, contact, feeling, perception, of course, you can't stop that happens. And the one-pointedness, that means the mind is one-pointed in that moment. It says there's hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling on that one point. But anyway, this is a different, difficult to try to explain perfectly. And all these things we've talked about, these, it's a general way that the mind operates. And it's not to necessarily be nitpicked into every tiny little detail and want to know exactly every reason for every little thing, because it's really, you likely not find that out. So it's understanding the general way that the mind works and the way that we use to help first slow down and weaken the habits, and then gradually are able to access the deeper levels of concentration and wisdom that then can eventually overcome the ego consciousness and totally break the cycle. Okay, friends, so I think that's all of the questions. And so we're going to have a few minutes break to use the restroom, take a drink of water. For those who like to stick around to do a few stretches and then meditate, then we'll come back in a few minutes. Hold the air in the lungs a few seconds. Allow the oxygen to get into the bloodstream. Throughout the whole, these few stretching exercises, always keep the tension in the body, try to feel the effects of the stretch and breathing in terms of increased body sensations, tingling sensations, or any aches or pains that might arise. letting go of your thoughts. On the next in-breath, raise the arms over the head, interlock the fingers, turn the palms up, straighten the arms, stretch your head back, stretch upwards all at the same time. Feel the sensations. The out breath, turn the palms down, touch the top of the head. Again, in breath, palms up, straighten the arms, head back. Out breath, touch the top of the head. Once more, in breath. Third time, hold that upward, stretch longer. Feel the sensation. And release the fingers. The out breath, lower the arms back to the sides. Relax. Feel that increased sensation, especially in your hands or fingers, shoulders. Feel where the clothing touches the skin of your shoulders or chest. Just body awareness. And then next on the in-breath, push up on the toes while raising the arms over the head. And this way, facing the palms toward each other, about 6 inches apart. Stretch. Out breath. Arms back to the sides, heels to the floor. Use the breathing to help lift and lower the body, like blowing up a helium balloon. The body raises upwards. And the out breath, come back down. Once more, in. Hold it longer. Out. Just gently close the eyes, just feel all those subtle pulsations, sensations. The more sensations you can notice, the less chance for your mind to get lost in useless thoughts. Past or future, we're trying to develop an interesting present moment to hold the attention. So many sensations you can observe and notice in the body. Next, we'll do the side bending on the in-breath. Raise both arms up. Keep the fingers and arms straight, close to the head. On the out-breath, bend over the right side. Feel that stretch on each side of the rib cage. In-breath up. And the other side, out breath. In breath. These exercises also give good massage to the heart. Out breath to the right. Gets twisted and massaged from different angles. Once more to each side. And the out breath, lower the arms, relax. Just gently close the eyes. Feel all those different sensations. Should be able to feel sensation from your feet, arms, chest, the head. The last exercise, head turning from right to left. On the in-breath, turn the head to the right. Try to look over your right shoulder, focus on something. Out breath back to the left. In breath right. Out breath left. Once more to each side. On the in-breath, let the head stop in the center. Just relax. Feel the whole body. Standing. 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 Okay, now we'll come back to you. Take your seat. So in this meditation, we want to focus on the arising of sensation. To observe contact produces feeling. And feeling produces that urge or craving. Especially try to focus on that sequence of contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and if you make some reaction, the becoming. so that the paticca samuppada becomes a more direct experience, not just some pie in the sky theory. So we're going to spend most of the time trying to keep the attention in the body. So first of all, just try to keep the head and spine a straight line. I'll be turning off my video. You can just focus on the words, the process. Just feel the weight of the buttocks and feet pressing the floor. Feel the way the legs are bent underneath. And feel some sensations there from that contact. So that pressure of the buttocks, feet or legs on the floor. Just the contact producing sensation. If there's any unpleasant sensations there, you can notice that as unpleasant sensation. Or if there's a pleasant sensation. You now feel your hands and fingers touching. Or feel each thumb and each finger. Feel some sensations. That subtle pulsation or tingling. Again, the fingers touching together as contact, producing sensation, feeling. If there's a desire to move your hands, that means it's an unpleasant feeling. And if you move, that craving, grasping, becoming took place in a nanosecond. And feel the weight of the arms hanging from the shoulders. Feel where the clothing touches the skin of the shoulder, the upper arm. It's the contact. Maybe you might feel some heat or sweat. Maybe it's an unpleasant sensation or a neutral sensation. Now feel the head balanced on top of the neck. Feel where the lips are touching together. Contact of the upper lip to the lower lip, producing sensation. Also the perception of lips comes into the mind. Are there any thoughts connected with that? And feel the tongue and the teeth and the gums inside the mouth. Each of those has its own sensation, contact sensation. Now feel the eyes resting in the socket, and the eyelids stretched over the eyeball. The contact producing sensation. feeling. If you have an eye irritation, it might be an unpleasant feeling, desire to rub it, craving, grasping. If there's any itches on the face, stinging, biting sensation. There might be a pleasant sensation. You might see some color behind the eyes, pleasant feeling arise. And from that point behind the eyes, let the awareness kind of expand to the outline of the sitting body. Kind of just try to feel the outline of the sitting body, like you were looking in a mental mirror. The body is a collage of so many different sensations. Sensations from your feet, buttocks, hands, shoulders, chest, head. All these sensations feeding into the computerized mind, coming up with a perception, a sitting body, that's a perception of thought. You call it me or I. It's the grasping that is me or I. And take a few deep, slow breaths. Feel that more dynamic, expanding and contracting of the abdomen, rib cage, and upper chest. Holding the air in the lungs for several seconds. To feel the pulse. This will activate more sensations. To ground the attention more in the center of the body. To feel that contact with the rib cage against this clothing that expands and contracts, clothing rubbing against the stomach, rib cage, your chest. It's that contact producing sensation. Producing perception, maybe thoughts. All those things happen by itself. Just continue taking a few more deep, slow breaths, cultivating that breathing awareness, breathing in, feeling the whole body. Breathing out, feeling the whole body. The whole body of breathing and the whole physical body, the outline of the physical body. Together. It's easy to do that. That expanding, contracting movement sends rippling sensations throughout the whole physical body. Bring it all into play, to focus. Breathing in, feeling the whole body, one trains oneself. Breathing out, feeling the whole body, training oneself. Developing concentration and mindfulness together. Concentration is staying with the breathing process. The mindfulness is noticing the different sensations, coming and going with it. Or any other hindrances, any thoughts trying to interfere, or drowsiness. Just knowing in this lifetime we have this physical body, this mind and body from birth. We're stuck with it. It's what we got. This mind and body. It's got the senses hanging on it, embedded in it. This gives rise to the contacts of bodily feeling, sound, smell, taste. Mental memories, thoughts, desires, volitional activity, wanting. When you get tired of the deep, slow breathing, you can let it go. Just rest with it in the middle of the breathing body. It's the true home for the mind. Just be alert for the contact. Any feelings they generate. Some painful sensations arising in the body. Mental contacts of memory coming into the mind. Some sounds. Contact produces feeling. Feeling attracts aversion or desire. If the contact is very weak, maybe no craving will arise, no obvious craving. Especially be alert for the painful feelings giving rise to thoughts of wanting to get away from it, an urge or an impulse to move the body, thinking about should I do it or not. It's grasping. In that moment of decision, even very subtle movements of the body, If the thought or I, me, or mine arises, notice that as ignorance. The consciousness. Keep turning up the power of the mental microscope to notice subtler and finer sensations in the body coming and going, subtle thoughts moving in the back of the mind, subtle urges. Any feelings or thoughts they trigger off. Breathing in, sitting. Breathing Breathing out, sitting. This mental cycles going on moment by moment. 12 links in the past, the present, the future, even the future being the next microsecond. The past, present, and future connected in a nanosecond with each moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, thinking. Of course, hard to see. So in the last minutes or so of this meditation, it could be useful just to reflect on this cycle of conditioning, even within the last couple weeks of your own activities, what you've done the last couple of weeks, brought from the past, how they affect what you're doing in the present, or what you did in the present yesterday, or affected today. And how that process continues, the accumulation and passing on volitional activities from the past to the present, repeating them, strengthening them back for the future, or weakening them. If you're practicing mindfulness and wisdom, you can either send the cycle going in forward direction, accumulating more ignorance and suffering, or you can reverse that accumulation of suffering by interrupting the cycle, craving, becoming, grasping, craving, grasping, becoming cycle, using right understanding, right effort, right mindfulness. All those are connected. Right understanding, right effort, right mindfulness of the eightfold path. Working on craving, grasping, and becoming. And also the sila, samadhi, and panya of the eightfold path. Practice of sila, observing precepts, help to weaken the painful effects of negative becoming and the increase of pleasant effects of positive becoming, wholesome becoming. Practice of samadhi and meditation helps to slow down the momentum of your negative thoughts. Or your wild, erratic thoughts. And wisdom will eventually weaken the roots of craving and desire, but don't worry too much about craving or desire. Work on negative grasping and becoming, the ones that bring the most suffering are unmindful thought, speech, and action. You can also reflect on how much work you've already done on that in the last year or two of your meditation, seeing the positive effect. These are the way we increase our faith and motivation to want to keep practicing. Breaking the cycle of craving, grasping, and becoming doesn't happen by wishing or wishful thinking. Comes only through the application of right understanding, right effort, right mindfulness. Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Okay, now let us spend the last few minutes of the meditation and cultivating, radiating out thoughts of metta, friendliness, compassion to our own body and mind, all other beings. That in conjunction with some deep, slow breathing. So again, doing some deep, slow breathing, holding the breath in the lungs. Several seconds. Feel that metta. It's like metta to your own body, mind, nervous system. Subtle life force. Oxygen going out to the cells. On the out breath, just imagine that it's positive energy or metta thoughts, pure love, wisdom, energy going out to all other beings. So on the in breath and holding in the breath, imagine those metta thoughts permeating your whole nervous system, body and mind. And breathing that out to others. Peacefulness, wisdom. Just thinking that may all living beings, wherever they might be well, peaceful, and wise. May all beings be free from unnecessary greed, hatred, and delusions that bring suffering. May all beings be able to hear the Dhamma and to practice meditation, to cultivate the spiritual faculties of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. To slow down the wheel of self-created suffering. May all beings be well, mindful, and wise. Just Imagine again with each out breath, just imagine these, feel these metta thoughts even going beyond the earth. Surrounding the whole earth, penetrating the minds and bodies of all beings. May all beings be well, mindful, and wise. May all beings be well, mindful, and wise. May all beings be well, mindful, and wise. And if you want to finish this meditation, join in chanting sadhu 3 times. On a long out breath, breathe in. Sadhu. 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 Now, friends, if you open your eyes and look at the screen, the shared screen, you might see a little diagram. Does that look familiar to you? It's a diagram by Samsara. Basically, that's what samsara is. It's our mind. We get swallowed up by our thought. Okay, friends, so that is all for today's program. And I hope you can continue to use some of this reflections, especially when you catch yourself, caught up in that process of feeling, craving, grasping, becoming. You can reflect on it and reflect on what are the useful steps in interrupting that cycle. Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, working on the becoming. Samadhi or meditation helps to slow down your thoughts. And the wisdom, understanding the illusion of the ego. Okay, anyway, then all the best in that. And we'll see you again on Wednesday or next Sunday. So I'll be around for a few more minutes if anybody wants to say anything. So, auf Wiedersehen.